did all this over one stop?
No. I did this because you put cuffs on a citizen and called it authority.
17.4 million. You're trying to ruin me.
You ruined yourself in that parking lot. Today is just the receipt.
The federal courtroom was silent enough to hear the hum of the HVAC system, a low drone that did nothing to cool the sweat forming on former agent Kyle Vance's brow. He sat at the defendant's table, his cheap suit ill-fitting, his posture slumped. He had no idea that the man he had profiled, harassed, and shackled in a scorching Arizona parking lot 3 years ago was not just a citizen, but a man whose service to the United States predated Vance's existence by decades. The jury had been deliberating for less than 4 hours. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, the number that echoed through the chamber, $17.4 million, sucked the air out of the room. But before the gavel fell, before the national headlines, and before the Department of Homeland Security faced one of its most humiliating public undressings in history, there was just a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, and a young agent who thought he was untouchable. It was 105 degrees in the shade, the kind of dry, relentless heat that radiates off the asphalt and burns through the soles of your shoes. Marcus Thorne, 72 years old, walked with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who had learned to manage the shrapnel still embedded in his left hip. He had just finished his bi-monthly appointment at the Carl T. Hayden VA Medical Center. Marcus was a man of routine. He wore a crisp, short-sleeved, button-down shirt tucked into pleated slacks, a leather belt that had seen better days, and a cap that simply read Vietnam Veteran in gold stitching against black fabric. He reached his Ford F-150, a truck he kept in pristine condition, its paint gleaming under the harsh sun. As he unlocked the door, he spotted an old friend, Luis, a fellow vet he had known since their days in the VFW hall. Luis was struggling with a walker near the handicap spots. Marcus paused, leaving his door open, and called out, "Oye, Luis, ¿necesitas ayuda con eso, hermano?" Marcus shouted, his voice gravelly but strong. He had picked up the language during 3 tours, working alongside local allies and decades living in the Southwest. Luis waved him off with a laugh. "Estoy bien, Marcus. I got it, old man. Go home." Marcus chuckled, waved, and turned back to his truck. That was the crime. That was the entirety of the interaction. A greeting between friends in a city where Spanish was as common as the cactus. But to the man sitting in the unmarked Chevrolet Tahoe 3 rows back, it was a signal. Agent Kyle Vance was 28 years old, with a high and tight haircut that hadn't grown out since the academy, and a pair of Oakley sunglasses that hid eyes constantly scanning for what he called targets of opportunity. Vance had been with ICE for 4 years. He was aggressive, hungry for numbers, and believed that his instincts were sharper than the law required. He didn't see 2 veterans exchanging pleasantries. He saw a black man speaking Spanish near a government facility driving a truck that looked too nice for a pensioner. Vance threw his Tahoe into gear. He didn't call it in. He didn't run the plate. If he had, he would have seen the Purple Heart registration. He just acted. He pulled the SUV diagonally behind Marcus's truck, blocking him in. Marcus had 1 foot on the running board when he heard the tires screech. He looked back, squinting against the glare. The SUV had no markings, but the grille lights flickered to life, red and blue strobes cutting through the daylight. Marcus didn't panic. He didn't run. He had faced mortar fire in the Tet offensive. A flashing light in a parking lot wasn't going to rattle him. He slowly stepped down, withdrew his key from the ignition, and stood by his door, his hands clearly visible. Vance stepped out. He didn't adjust his belt or check his surroundings. He marched toward Marcus with his hand resting on his holstered Sig Sauer, his chest puffed out in a posture of assumed dominance. "Let me see your hands," Vance barked, though Marcus's hands were already resting on the roof of his truck. "My hands are right here, young man," Marcus said, his voice level. "Is there a problem?" "We'll see," Vance said, closing the distance until he was well within Marcus's personal space. "I need to see proof of citizenship. Now." Marcus looked at the agent. He saw the lack of name tape on the tactical vest, the aggression, the youth. He had seen this look before, usually on the faces of green lieutenants who got good men killed in the jungle because they couldn't read a map. "Proof of citizenship," Marcus repeated. "I'm standing in a VA hospital parking lot. I just finished my cardiology appointment. You're blocking my vehicle. I'm asking you again, what is the reasonable suspicion for this detention?" Vance stiffened. He wasn't used to the targets talking back. He was used to fear. He was used to confusion. He wasn't prepared for a lecture on criminal procedure from a man he had already categorized as a statistic. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Vance sneered. "I heard you speaking Spanish. You fit the profile of a suspect we're looking for. Now produce identification or I will place you under arrest for failure to comply with a federal agent." The air between them seemed to shimmer, not just from the heat, but from the sudden, sharp tension that snapped into place. Marcus Thorne did not move to his pocket. He did not reach for his wallet. He kept his hands flat on the hot metal of his truck's roof, fingers spread wide. He knew exactly what was happening. He had spent 30 years as a high school history and civics teacher after the war. He knew the Constitution better than he knew the back of his own hand. "Officer," Marcus said, correcting the title deliberately. "Speaking a language other than English is not a crime. It is not probable cause. It is not even reasonable suspicion. You are currently detaining me under the color of law without articulable facts. That is a Fourth Amendment violation." Vance took a step closer, his face inches from Marcus's. "I'm an immigration and customs enforcement agent. I have broad authority to determine the status of individuals within the border zone. You are going to stop playing lawyer and start showing me papers." "I am not in a border zone," Marcus replied. His eyes locked on Vance's sunglasses. "I am in Phoenix, Arizona. And under United States versus Brignoni-Ponce, the Supreme Court ruled that apparent ancestry or language alone cannot justify a stop. You are fishing, son, and you are fishing in very dangerous waters." Vance's jaw clenched. He felt his authority slipping, the situation drifting away from the script he had written in his head. He had expected the old man to fumble to apologize, to hand over a driver's license that Vance could then scrutinize for any irregularity. Instead, he was being cited case law. "Turn around," Vance ordered, his hand gripping the handcuffs on his belt. "I'm detaining you for obstruction of an investigation." "I am not obstructing," Marcus said, refusing to turn. "I am asserting my rights. I am under no obligation to answer your questions or provide identification unless you can articulate a crime you suspect me of committing. Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" "You're detained," Vance snapped. "Then I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent until I have legal counsel present. I will not consent to any searches. I will not answer any questions regarding my citizenship or my history." Vance paused. For a split second, doubt crept in. The man's English was flawless, his demeanor commanding. But Vance had already committed. To back down now in the middle of the parking lot would be a defeat he couldn't stomach. His ego, fragile and inflated by the badge, took the wheel. He convinced himself that the man's refusal was a tactic, a way to hide the truth. Why wouldn't he just show an ID if he was legal? "You want to play it that way?" Vance said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Fine. We can do this the hard way. You're acting suspicious. You're agitated. You're refusing a lawful order." "I am perfectly calm," Marcus said. "You are the one who is agitated, and your order is not lawful." "Last chance," Vance warned. "ID, now." Marcus remained silent. He stared straight ahead, focusing on a distant palm tree, his face a mask of discipline forged in the mud of the Mekong Delta. He had been interrogated by North Vietnamese regulars who used bamboo canes to break shins. He was not going to be broken by a 20-something bureaucrat with a god complex. Vance interpreted the silence as insolence. He grabbed Marcus's left arm, yanking it off the truck. The sudden movement sent a jolt of pain through Marcus's hip, but he didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He went rigid, allowing his body to become a dead weight, a technique of passive resistance he had seen used during the protests of the 60s. "Stop resisting," Vance shouted loud enough for the sound to carry. "I am not resisting," Marcus said, clearly speaking not to Vance but to the witnesses he knew were watching. "I am complying with your physical force, though I protest this action as unlawful." Vance twisted Marcus's arm behind his back, pushing him against the hot metal of the truck. "You're done," Vance hissed. "You're going to federal lockup. Let's see how much case law you know when you're in a holding cell." The commotion had drawn an audience. The VA parking lot was never empty. It was a transit hub for the wounded, the healing, and the aged. 2 cars stopped in the driving lane, their drivers rolling down windows. A group of 3 men, all wearing VFW hats similar to Marcus's, stopped their conversation near the entrance and began walking briskly toward the scene. But the most important observer was Sarah Jenkins, a 62-year-old retired emergency room nurse who had been loading groceries into her car 2 spaces over. Sarah had seen the SUV block the truck. She had heard the raised voice of the agent. She didn't hesitate. She pulled out her smartphone, tapped the camera app, and hit record. She held the phone steady, framing the shot to include the agent's face, the lack of markings on the car, and Marcus's calm demeanor. "I've got you on video," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the heat. "I see him. He is not resisting." Vance whipped his head around, seeing the woman recording. "Back up, ma'am. This is a federal investigation. Interfere, and you'll be next." "I am 20 feet away," Sarah yelled back, not budging an inch. "I am on public property. I have a First Amendment right to record public officials in the course of their duties. I suggest you ease up on that man before you break his arm." Vance's face turned a mottled shade of red. He turned his attention back to Marcus, who was now pressed cheek first against his own truck. Vance felt the eyes of the crowd. He felt the lens of the camera. The narrative was slipping away from him in real time. He needed to assert control. He needed to make this look like a legitimate takedown of a dangerous individual. "Stop tensing up," Vance shouted, putting unnecessary pressure on Marcus's shoulder. "Stop fighting." "Young man," Marcus said, his voice strained but audible. "I am 72 years old. I have shrapnel in that hip. I am a disabled veteran. If you injure me, you will not just lose your job. You will go to prison." "Shut up." Vance grabbed the other arm, forcing them together. "You're under arrest for failure to identify and resisting an officer." One of the veterans who had walked over a man with a cane and a Marine Corps t-shirt shouted from the sidewalk. "Hey, that's Marcus Thorne. He's a Silver Star recipient. What the hell are you doing?" Vance froze for a microsecond. Silver Star, but he pushed the thought away. Likely a lie, he told himself. Stolen valor. Illegal aliens buy fake histories all the time. It was a delusion he needed to maintain to justify what he was doing. "Back away!" Vance screamed at the gathering crowd, his hand dropping to his weapon again, unholstering it halfway. The threat was clear. The crowd gasped. Sarah didn't flinch. "He's threatening us now," she narrated for the video. "He has a weapon drawn on unarmed veterans in a hospital parking lot." Marcus, feeling the metal cuffs bite into his wrists, closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying for himself. He was praying for the young fool behind him. "You have no idea," Marcus thought. "You have absolutely no idea what you just stepped into." "I am not resisting," Marcus said again, ensuring the microphone on Sarah's phone picked it up. "I am being kidnapped by an agent who has refused to identify his probable cause. My name is Marcus Aurelius Thorne. My social security number ends in 4592. I am a United States citizen." "Tell it to the judge," Vance grunted, shoving Marcus toward the Tahoe. He opened the back door and pushed the older man inside. The interior of the SUV was sweltering. Vance hadn't left the AC running. Marcus struggled to slide across the seat without the use of his hands, his bad hip screaming in protest. Vance slammed the door, sealing Marcus inside. He walked around to the driver's side, glared at Sarah one last time, who just zoomed in on his face, and got in. He sped out of the parking lot, tires squealing, leaving a group of angry veterans and a very dangerous video file in his wake. The back of the government SUV smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, a scent that Marcus associated with institutional failure. His wrists were bound tight behind his back, the metal digging into the ulna bone, cutting off circulation to his thumbs. The air conditioning finally kicked in, blasting freezing air against his sweat-drenched shirt, sending a shiver through his frame that had nothing to do with fear. Marcus sat perfectly still. He did not ask where they were going. He did not beg for water. He did not complain about the cuffs. He stared at the back of Agent Vance's head, studying the short hairs on his neck, the way his ears turned red at the tips. Marcus was analyzing the enemy. It was a habit from the jungle. You learn to read the silence to understand the predator before it struck. In this case, the predator was a boy playing soldier. Vance was nervous. Marcus could see it in the way the agent's eyes darted to the rearview mirror every 10 seconds. Vance was tapping on the steering wheel a frantic, erratic rhythm. He picked up his radio handset, keyed it, then put it down. He did it again a mile later. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha," Vance finally said. "I'm 10 to 15 with one male subject, in transit to processing." "Copy 4 Alpha. Charges." The dispatcher's voice was tinny and bored. "Failure to identify. Resisting. Possible fraudulent documents. Suspect claims military affiliation." "Copy. We'll have a holding cell ready." Marcus shifted his weight, trying to relieve the pressure on his hip. The pain was a dull roar now, a familiar companion. He thought about his grandfather, who had been arrested in Alabama in 1955 for sitting on a bench. He thought about his father, who had been pulled over in 1972 while wearing his army uniform and asked if he stole the car. Progress, Marcus thought bitterly. Now we have 4K cameras and federal lawsuits, but the ride feels exactly the same. "You know," Vance said suddenly, his eyes meeting Marcus's in the mirror. "If you just cooperate, this goes easier. We run your prints, we find out who you really are, and we process the deportation order. Don't make me add federal perjury to the list." Marcus didn't blink. "I have nothing to say to you without my attorney." "Suit yourself. I've seen guys like you before. You think because you've been here a few years, maybe bought a fake ID, that you're safe. The system always catches up." "The system," Marcus said, breaking his silence only to deliver a warning, "is working exactly as intended, Agent Vance. But not for you." Vance laughed a short, nervous bark. "Yeah. Who's in cuffs, you or me?" "Cuffs come off," Marcus said softly. "Court records are forever." Vance turned up the radio, drowning out the old man's voice with the sound of talk radio. He needed to drown out the gnawing feeling in his gut. He had made good stops before. He had found drugs cash guys with warrants. This felt different. The man wasn't acting like someone with something to hide. He was acting like someone with something to prove. They arrived at the ICE processing facility in downtown Phoenix 20 minutes later. It was a fortress of concrete and tinted glass. Vance drove into the sally port, the heavy steel gate clanking shut behind them. The sound was final. There was no turning back now. Vance hauled Marcus out of the car. Marcus stumbled slightly as his feet hit the concrete, his legs stiff. Vance marched him toward the booking intake, gripping his arm with unnecessary force. Inside, the air was sterile and cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Other officers looked up as they entered. They saw a well-dressed elderly black man in cuffs, looking not like a criminal but like the deacon of a church. "What you got, Vance?" a desk sergeant asked, eyeing Marcus with curiosity. "Uncooperative subject," Vance said loudly, slapping Marcus's wallet, which he had finally removed from Marcus's pocket onto the counter without opening it. "Refused to ID in the field. Suspected illegal entry. Resisting." Take him to biometric, the sergeant said. Let's see who he is. The processing room was a humiliating assembly line of dehumanization. Marcus was told to stand against a wall. His cuffs were removed only so he could place his hands on the digital scanner. His fingers were stiff, his joints swollen. The technician, a woman who looked tired, grabbed his hand roughly. "Relax the fingers," she droned. "Don't help me, just let it go limp." Marcus complied. He watched the green light of the scanner sweep across his fingertips. Whirl, loop, arch. The unique topography of his identity was being converted into binary code and shot through the secure fiber optic lines to the FBI's CJIS database and the Department of Homeland Security's IDENT system. Vance stood behind him, arms crossed, tapping his foot. He was waiting for the hit, the previous deportation order, the foreign birth record, the overstayed visa. He needed that hit to justify the stop. He needed it to wash away the memory of the woman recording him in the parking lot. The computer hummed. A progress bar on the monitor filled up. Searching. Searching. Suddenly the screen didn't just display a result. It flashed red. A distinct, jarring alert tone beeped from the console, a sound the technician rarely heard. Critical match found. Restricted record. Clearance level, top secret/SCI. The technician pulled her hands away from the keyboard as if it were hot. "Whoa," she whispered. Vance stepped forward. "What is it? Did he pop for a warrant?" The technician shook her head, her eyes wide. She pointed at the screen. Below the red banner, data fields were populating rapidly. Subject Thorne, Marcus Aurelius. Citizenship, United States birth. Military service, U.S. Army, retired. 05 Lieutenant Colonel. Award Silver Star, Bronze Star, Viv Purple Heart 2. Status Federal Pensioner. Flag do not detain/notify DOD. Liaison immediately. Vance stared at the screen. The words didn't make sense. Lieutenant Colonel Silver Star, United States citizen by birth. The room seemed to tilt. The air conditioning suddenly felt freezing. Upstairs in the glass-walled office of the special agent in charge, a silent alarm triggered on a computer terminal. Director Robert Miller was reviewing budget reports when his screen was hijacked by the urgent notification. A high-value record had just been flagged in his booking room. A record associated with classified intelligence work from the 1970s and a distinguished combat history. Miller, a 55-year-old career official who prided himself on running a clean ship, clicked the file. He read the name. He read the location, booking room B. He read the arresting agent, Vance Kyle. "Vance?" Miller muttered, the blood draining from his face. "What have you done?" Miller grabbed his jacket and moved. He didn't walk. He sprinted. He burst out of his office, bypassed the elevator, and took the stairs 2 at a time. He knew the volatile mix of a young hotshot agent and a man with that kind of service record. This wasn't just a bad stop. This was a catastrophe. Back in the booking room, the silence was deafening. The technician looked at Marcus with new eyes, eyes filled with respect and terror. Vance was still staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open, trying to find a way to interpret the data that didn't end his career. "There must be a glitch," Vance stammered. He was speaking Spanish. He refused to ID. Marcus stood slowly, rubbing his wrists. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at Vance. "It's not a glitch, son. It's a dossier." The door to the booking room flew open with a bang that made everyone jump. Director Miller stood there, chest heaving, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked at the screen, looked at Marcus, and then looked at Vance with a gaze that could peel paint. "Step away from the subject." Miller ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." Vance stepped back, his hands raising instinctively as if he were the one being arrested. "Director, I can explain." The subject was uncooperative in the field. I had reasonable suspicion based on linguistic profiling and— "Quiet." Miller's voice cracked like a whip. He didn't look at Vance. He walked straight to Marcus Thorne. Miller's eyes took in the bruised wrists, the dust on the veteran's slacks, the dignity that remained unbroken despite the surroundings. "Colonel Thorne," Miller said, using the rank displayed on the screen. "I am Director Robert Miller. On behalf of this agency, I apologize. This should never have happened." Miller turned to the booking desk where Marcus's leather wallet sat still ignored by Vance. Miller picked it up. He opened it. Right there in the clear plastic window was a retired military ID card. Behind it, a U.S. passport card. Miller pulled them out and held them up, turning to face Vance. "Did you look?" Miller asked, shaking the IDs in Vance's face. "Did you even bother to look before you put a Vietnam veteran in chains?" He wouldn't show it to me," Vance stammered, shrinking against the wall. "He refused to identify. He was quoting case law. I thought he was a sovereign citizen or an illegal trying to bluff." "He was asserting his rights, you idiot," Miller roared. "Rights he earned in a jungle while you were waiting to be born. You detained a U.S. citizen based on bias, you ignored his credentials, and you dragged him in here." Miller turned back to Marcus. "Colonel, you are free to go immediately. We can have a car take you back to your vehicle. We will expunge this arrest record within the hour." Marcus didn't move toward the door. He stood his ground, his presence filling the room. The pain in his hip was excruciating, but he wouldn't show it. "No director," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of command. "I am not just free to go. A crime has been committed here. A deprivation of rights under color of law. Title 18, Section 242. The room went dead silent. "I want the body camera footage secured." Marcus continued listing his demands with military precision. "I want the dash cam footage from the Tahoe. I want the booking logs, the printout of that screen, and the radio dispatch recordings. And I want them preserved immediately. If 1 second of footage goes missing, Director, I will own this building." Miller nodded. He knew when he was beaten. He knew the law, and he knew that Vance had handed this man a winning lottery ticket on a silver platter. "I will personally ensure all evidence is locked down, Colonel. You have my word." "Your word is appreciated," Marcus said cold, "but I'll prefer a chain of custody log." Marcus turned to Vance. The young agent looked small now, stripped of his bravado. The sunglasses were off, holding them in trembling hands. "You asked me if I knew who was in cuffs," Marcus said to him. "You asked me to think about the system. Well, Agent Vance, the system has verified me. Now it's going to verify you." Marcus reached into his wallet, which Miller had placed back on the counter, and pulled out a card. It wasn't an ID. It was a business card for a law firm in DC-1 he had kept for years just in case. He looked at it, then put it back. "I'm ready to leave now," Marcus said, "and I'll take that ride. My hip is killing me." As Miller escorted Marcus out of the secure area, treating him like a visiting dignitary, Vance remained in the booking room. The technician turned off the monitor, hiding the red alert, but the image was burned into Vance's mind. He looked at his own reflection in the blank screen. He didn't see a federal agent anymore. He saw a liability. The lawsuit landed on the desk of the United States Attorney like a tactical nuke. Thorne versus United States et al. It was filed not in a month, but in 72 hours. Marcus had retained one of the most vicious civil rights litigators in the country, a woman named Elena Ross, who ate qualified immunity for breakfast. The discovery phase was a bloodbath for the government. The Department of Justice tried to argue for dismissal, claiming Agent Vance had made a good-faith mistake. Judge Patricia Halloway, a no-nonsense jurist, denied the motion in a scathing 3-page order. "There is no good-faith exception for racial profiling," she wrote. "Discovery will proceed." And what discovery found was worse than anyone expected. Elena Ross subpoenaed Vance's phone records. They found a group chat with 3 other agents from his academy class. The messages from the day of the arrest were damning. 14:05. Just snagged a big one at the VA. Old guy thinks he's tough. Probably a mule using a stolen truck. 1407. Speaking Spanish. Refused ID. Gonna teach him some respect. There was no mention of a crime. No mention of reasonable suspicion. Just ego and bias. Then came the video. Sarah Jenkins, the nurse, had uploaded her footage to a cloud server before she even left the parking lot. Her video, combined with the Bodycam footage, which Director Miller had forcefully preserved, painted a picture of total incompetence. The Bodycam audio was particularly brutal. It captured Vance muttering, "Gotcha, amigo," to himself before he even stepped out of the car. It captured Marcus's calm, legal assertions. It captured the moment Vance twisted the arm of a compliant 72-year-old man. The media got hold of it. The headline on CNN ran for 3 days. The veteran in cuffs. Fox News, MSNBC, the BBC. They all ran the story. A split screen showed Marcus in his army dress greens from 1970 receiving the Silver Star next to the mugshot taken at the ICE facility. The optics were impossible to defend. The White House press secretary was asked about it. The Secretary of Homeland Security was summoned to a Senate hearing. Senators who rarely agreed on anything found common ground in their outrage. "We have an agent," a senator from Arizona thundered during the hearing, "who cannot distinguish between a decorated American officer and a criminal simply because he heard the Spanish language. If this is our standard for law enforcement, God help us all." Internal Affairs tore Vance apart. They audited his previous stops. They found a pattern. Over 80% of his random checks were on Hispanic or black men. His conviction rate was abysmal. He was a harasser, not an investigator. 6 months into the litigation, the DOJ offered a settlement. They offered $2 million. Elena Ross laughed and hung up the phone. They came back with $5 million. Marcus declined. "It's not about the money," Marcus told his lawyer. "It's about the verdict. I want a jury to say it. I want it on the record that what he did was wrong. Settlements have non-disclosure agreements. I want the truth." The trial began 14 months after the arrest. Marcus took the stand. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He simply told the jury what it felt like to serve his country, to bleed for it, and then to be treated like an invader in his own home. He described the pain in his hip, the humiliation of the cuffs, the fear that he would disappear into the system. Vance took the stand in his own defense. He looked smaller, paler. He tried to explain his training, tried to use police jargon to sanitize his actions, but under cross-examination he crumbled. He couldn't articulate a single fact that justified the stop other than the language Marcus spoke. "So," Elena Ross asked the jury in her closing argument, "Agent Vance decided that Mr. Thorne was suspicious. Why? Because he was black? Because he spoke Spanish? Because he had a nice truck? In Agent Vance's world, a black man with dignity is a threat. A black man with rights is a suspect. Ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution is not a suggestion. It is a shield, and Agent Vance tried to break it." The clerk read the verdict with a steady voice. "On the count of false imprisonment, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of battery, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of civil rights violations under Section 1983, we find for the plaintiff." Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded. He looked at the jury. They were a mix of ages and races, ordinary Americans who had seen the truth. "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $2. $4 million, the clerk read. A murmur went through the room. That was a large number, but the clerk wasn't finished. "And regarding punitive damages." The room held its breath. Punitive damages were designed to punish, to send a message so loud that no agent would ever dare do this again. "We award the plaintiff the sum of $15 million. Total judgment, $17.4 million. Vance put his head in his hands. The judgment against him personally would force him into bankruptcy for the rest of his life, though the government would likely indemnify the bulk of it. but his career was over. He had been fired 3 months prior, and with this verdict, he would never carry a badge or a gun again. He was unhireable. The aftermath was swift. The Phoenix YCE field office was placed under federal monitoring. New protocols were established nationwide. The Thorne Rule, which required supervisor approval for any detention based solely on immigration status checks in non-border zones. Marcus Thorne didn't buy a yacht. He didn't move to a private island. He took the check, paid his lawyers, and then walked into the local VFW hall. He established the Thorne Legal Defense Fund for veterans. The fund provided free legal representation for any veteran regardless of race or background who faced police misconduct or civil rights violations. He donated $10 million to the fund. The rest he used to renovate the VA Center's waiting room and to set up college scholarships for the children of deported veterans. One evening, a year after the verdict, Marcus sat on his porch. The Arizona sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. He held a glass of iced tea. His hip still hurt when it rained, and the memory of the cuffs still woke him up some nights. He wasn't happy about what happened. He wasn't triumphant. He was tired. Justice is hard work. It requires a vigilance that weighs heavy on the soul. But he looked out at his truck parked in the driveway, gleaming in the twilight. He was free. He was home. And he had made sure that the next time an agent saw an old soldier in a parking lot, they would think twice. The wind rustled the American flag hanging from his porch pillar. It wasn't just cloth. It was a contract. And Marcus had enforced the terms. This story serves as a reminder that freedom isn't free. It requires constant defense, not just on the battlefield, but in our own neighborhoods. Marcus Thorne stood up when it would have been easier to bow down. What do you think? Was the $17.4 million judgment enough to teach the government a lesson? Or should Agent Vance have faced criminal prison time for his actions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in protecting our veterans and our civil rights, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of justice served.